Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. I'm Maruf Raza. The commissioning of India's biggest aircraft carrier, INS Vikramaditya, by Defence Minister A.K. Antony in Russia gives India enormous maritime strategic advantages and reinforces the country's aspirations to become a major Asian power. And later in the show, even as Foreign Minister Salman Khurshid leads India's delegation at the CHOGM summit in Colombo, the absence of India's Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh from the Commonwealth Summit in Sri Lanka will have a visible impact on India's ability to influence the government in Sri Lanka, just as New Delhi's stock continues to decline within India's neighbourhood. Our guest this week is Mr. Rahul Roy Chaudhary, a Senior Fellow for South Asian Studies at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. Mr. Rahul Roy Chaudhary is the author of India's Maritime Security, and he will highlight the strategic relevance of INS Vikramaditya for India's Navy and the South Asian region. He will be joining us from London. And later in the show, to discuss India's foreign policy challenges in the neighbourhood, we will be joined by Dr. C. Raja Mohan from the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. Dr. Raja Mohan is the author of Crossing the Rubicon, the Shaping of India's New Foreign Policy, and Dr. Raja Mohan will respond to questions on whether India's foreign policy in the region needs to be re-examined. The commissioning of INS Vikramaditya, till date the largest aircraft carrier to join the Indian Navy, will address India's long-standing aspirations to have at least two aircraft carrier groups to operate on both sides of the Indian peninsula, but also to convey a strategic signal to India's rival and to guard India's large maritime interests.
Vikramaditya, the pride of the Indian Navy, began its life as Baku and was rechristened as Admiral Gorshkov after the fall of the Soviet Union. Several missteps, many delays and several thousand crore rupees in overspending later, the ship joined the Navy in Severodvinsk in the Arctic regions with Defence Minister A.K. Antony proudly looking on. In India, it will be at the centre of an ambitious carrier battle group with the potential to dominate India's nearby waters. It will bristle with MiG-29 fighters and choppers armed to the teeth, ready to carry the battle to the enemy.
Is going to be a real game changer insofar as strategic reach and strategic capability is concerned. It is only an aircraft carrier which can provide you the kind of command of the seas that India's peninsular structure, which is as good as an island, surrounded by not too pleasant circumstances in the Indian Ocean, requires.
If all goes well, INS Vikramaditya and INS Viraat, the existing aircraft carrier, will dominate the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal and parts of the Indian Ocean region, hitting the enemy from afar. Pakistan doesn't have carriers and Chinese Navy has only begun working on them last year.
The exercise of sea power over large areas of the ocean are concerned, there is nothing that is more formidable and visible than an aircraft carrier. And nothing can replace that. But when it comes to sea denial, there is no question that the nuclear attack submarine is the most potent force. But sea denial platform cannot do many things that is required of sea control.
Professionals may have differences, but it's clear that Russia has benefited from the Vikramaditya refit, which went hundreds of crores over initial projections. India may have got the aircraft carrier for free in 2004 from Russia, but it's going to cost the nation more than 12,000 crore rupees. Moreover, if the refit had been done in India, many yards would have gained from the experience.
Perhaps the immediate impact of INS Vikramaditya becoming part of India's naval fleet is to convey a message both to India's friends and its foes that India cannot be taken lightly in the waters of the Indian Ocean. And joining us from London is Mr. Rahul Roy Chaudhary, a Senior Fellow for South Asian Studies at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London. Mr. Chaudhary is the author of India's Maritime Security and a well-known expert on naval and maritime issues. My first question, Rahul, is it is said that the addition of a new aircraft carrier, the INS Vikramaditya, will be a game changer in projecting India's strategic capabilities. How important is an aircraft carrier for military diplomacy, and what can it be used for in war and in peace?
The commissioning of the Vikramaditya into the Indian Navy signifies two important developments. Firstly, that the Indian government and the Indian Navy are committed to aircraft carrier capability for the naval air arm in the foreseeable future. This is important, as even though the Indian Navy has been operating an aircraft carrier for the last 52 years, there have been occasions when it wasn't clear whether this would continue or not. The second important development is that an aircraft carrier is not just an instrument of war, it is also a powerful tool for power projection and diplomacy. And this is the case as well for the Vikramaditya, where the acquisition of the Vikramaditya clearly indicates that India is keen to seek an influential role in the Indian Ocean region.
China is fast emerging as a key maritime player in the Indian Ocean region, even as India maintains aircraft carrier groups, apart from the US, in the Indian Ocean region. So how do you see the maritime rivalry coupled with America's pivot to Asia affecting our regional security and the dynamics of this region?
The growth and expansion and the growing reach of the People's Liberation of Army Navy in China is of concern to India. We've seen several statements made by serving chiefs of the Indian naval staff on this issue, particularly in terms of Chinese naval activities in the Indian Ocean. Having said that, I think it's very important to take a decision as to where the priorities for the Indian Navy will be in the foreseeable future. Will it be the Indian Ocean, which is a huge area of water and has over 50 littoral states, or will it be the Indo-Pacific, which is even larger in terms of area and the number of states? If it is the Indian Ocean, which, as I said, is itself a huge area, then it means that India will be in a stronger position in relative terms compared to the Chinese Navy, which will be limited in terms of the reach that it can undertake vis-a-vis the Indian Navy, which is an Indian Ocean Navy.
India's Navy is also expected to guard the shipping lanes from the Middle East to East Asia. Does it have really the capabilities to achieve all that is being expected from the Navy in the coming years?
In the last few years, we've heard the term net security provider being envisioned in terms of the Indian Navy's roles and responsibilities in the Indian Ocean or the Indo-Pacific region. This is not an Indian term. This was first used by the US National Intelligence Council in their view of the Indian Navy's role. Whether India agrees or disagrees with the term, it is important that India plays an active role in naval diplomacy and in influencing developments in the waters around it, especially, I would argue, the Indian Ocean. In this case, the sea lines of communication for West Asia are particularly important in terms of the growing demand for energy resources and the growing dependency on the import of oil and energy resources for India from West Asia. At the same time, it is important to ensure the stability and security of the sea lanes of communication leading towards the Straits of Malacca and Singapore.
Well, it's quite clear that the addition of INS Vikramaditya to India's naval fleet will not just add to India's maritime muscle, but add to the capabilities of a navy which is regarded by the Americans to be capable of operating up to NATO standards. Welcome back. With the heads of governments of nearly 50 countries present in Colombo for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the absence of India's Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh is being noticed, not just by the galaxy of world leaders, but more importantly by the hosts, Sri Lanka, even as Colombo remains tense at the possibility of a negative event that could mar Sri Lanka's coming out party.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh cancelled his visit to Sri Lanka, succumbing to domestic pressures. That may have gained him a few friends among politicians in Tamil Nadu, but India's ties with Colombo may be affected. The move, say experts, has given China and Pakistan an opportunity to expand their base in the war-ravaged island nation, negating earlier attempts by India to keep Beijing and Islamabad's influence in check.
India has to engage Sri Lanka. It has no other option. And the Prime Minister's absence at the Chogam would slightly leave a bitter taste in President Rajapaksa. Now, I don't think it will be taken lightly by him. So, it is going to be a little difficult to engage Sri Lanka.
India wants to have a say in the situation in Lanka, particularly relating to the Tamils. Delhi has persuaded the Rajapaksa government to uphold the 13th Amendment, which grants greater powers to local government. But the PM's absence from the Commonwealth meet only shows India's indecision, not the principled stand of a strong neighbour. This decision is evident during India's dealings with Bangladesh. In 2011, protests by Mamata Banerjee, now Chief Minister of West Bengal and then a UPA ally, ensured that India did not sign the Teesta Wars agreement with Dhaka. India let down Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who had agreed to a transit agreement between India and Bangladesh.
In the case of Bangladesh, I think that is, in a sense, a more serious matter, where clearly, with regard at least to the Teesta waters, the government was in a position to take a decision as the central government. It is unfortunate that the ruling establishment in India was unable to persuade the major political parties, including the BJP, in supporting a conclusion that was for the benefit of the people and certainly for good relations with Bangladesh.
Meanwhile, down south, as the situation in the Maldives gets murkier, India is caught in a bind. The danger of radicalism looms over the Maldives, but India, insisting on polls, prefers to play safe by not responding to deposed President Nasheed's call for interference. India lost some of its ability to exercise leverage over this island nation located in the midst of an important shipping route in the Indian Ocean.
Foreign governments, whether it is that of India or anyone else, have to learn to live with the government that people elect. It is likely that people will elect one person, and India has to be not only neutral but also seen to be neutral.
India's profile in its own neighborhood is shrinking rapidly. It is unable to influence neighboring countries. The question is, how long will India allow regional compulsions to trump foreign affairs?
While Dr. Manmohan Singh's government seems to focus more on Pakistan, Afghanistan and the United States, India's near neighborhood seems to have been ignored by New Delhi. And joining us now is Dr. C. Rajamohan from the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi, the author of Crossing the Rubicon, The Shaping of India's New Foreign Policy. Dr. Rajamohan, my first question. It is not just India, but several other countries that remain strongly critical of Sri Lanka's recent human rights record. And while Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh has given in to local domestic pressures, others like Britain's David Cameron have chosen to go to Colombo and convey their people's objections. Do you believe that Dr. Singh has done the right thing by choosing to absent himself from the Chogam summit?
He's done absolutely the wrong thing by not going to Colombo for the Commonwealth summit. I think the fact is, when it comes to dealing with the Tamil minority question in Sri Lanka, every government, this is not the first one to face pressures from Tamil Nadu in terms of how we deal with the situation. Now, I think the failure of this government has been twofold. One, it has not politically managed the dynamic in Tamil Nadu. It's not engaged them and told them, look, this is why we got to go, the reasons for going there, and the importance of engaging the Tamils of Sri Lanka. Second failure, I think, has been the Congress party's determination to put its electoral calculations above the national interest. Now, when we had better governments, more coherent governments in Delhi, on the political management side, and the rather narrow short-term calculus of the Congress party.
The Rajapaksa government in Sri Lanka is unlikely to forget this censor from New Delhi at a time when it was keen to showcase Sri Lanka. And there is also a view that the space created by India's absence would be taken up by China and others, which are always keen to benefit from India's diplomatic shortcomings, particularly in South Asia. What are your views?
See, China has already made considerable headway in Sri Lanka. And the more that India mishandles the situation in Sri Lanka, there will be greater opportunities for China to raise its profile. It's not just China, actually. It is Pakistan, for example, has been trying to gain ground in Sri Lanka for quite some time. There's speculation about Sri Lanka buying arms from Pakistan, not just guns and small stuff like that, but fighter aircraft. So I think we are the costs and consequences of mismanagement of our neighborhood policy are going to be pretty severe. And they're not just related to China, because you're needlessly losing support of critical constituencies in Sri Lanka and other neighboring countries. The other casualty, of course, is Commonwealth is an important forum. India is one of the largest countries there. So by not joining there, and there again, I think we are losing ground by showing that major summits are vulnerable to India's domestic pressures.
While Dr. Manmohan Singh has been keen to build bridges with Pakistan, a country built around anti-Indianism, by citing the need for engaging proactively with our neighbors, Dr. Singh's government appears to have made little use of the goodwill that existed in Sheikh Hasina's government in Bangladesh, or the influence that India has traditionally commanded in Nepal and the Maldives. How can India regain the necessary initiative and the space in its neighborhood in the next 5 years?
I think the blunders towards Bangladesh are far more tragic, far more consequential for India's foreign policy in the long term than the current problems with Sri Lanka. Because what we've seen is in Bangladesh, a leader who's willing to go all the way to address India's concerns. So this was a historic moment for the Manmohan Singh government to actually clinch the transformed relationship with Dhaka when he went there in September 2011. But once Mamata Banerjee created problems, I think the Congress party once again, I think, is the source of the problem. I mean, the Prime Minister would have happily signed those agreements. But I think once the Congress party calculates that, look, we can't take on Mamata Banerjee, we can't displease her. There again, I think the consideration is she's going to come to Parliament with 30 seats, what happens to the next government, and all those kind of calculations. I think the party's decision to put, again, future political considerations, narrow political considerations, at a very historic moment in the relationship with Bangladesh, once again, I think proves that the present dispensation, the political dispensation, has been utterly negligent of India's long-term interests.
Rarely in India's post-independence history has India's domestic politics had such a profound impact on India's foreign policy, particularly with that of its neighbors. And the absence of the Indian Prime Minister from the CHOGM summit in Colombo would be a diplomatic damage that New Delhi would take years to repair. That's all in this episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, thank you for watching and goodbye.